To quote Nagarjuna's precious garland, he says, if you and the world wish to attain unsurpassed enlightenment, its root is bodhicitta, firm like the king of mountains, and likewise compassion reaching the limits of every direction, and non-dual pristine wisdom. I'll put this in the chat so you can read it. So Nagarjuna taught the precious garland to the king, but here where he says, if you and the world wish to attain unsurpassed enlightenment, we can understand that you to be ourselves. So if I, myself, and the world being all other sentient beings within the animate world, wish to achieve Buddhahood, there is no other method than to train in bodhicitta. If not, you cannot achieve Buddhahood. So therefore, if bodhicitta arises in your continuum from that day onwards, that is when true happiness begins in this life and in all future lifetimes. That is when you start to be able to accomplish the vast welfare of all sentient beings. And all of your actions turn into causes for Buddhahood. On the other hand, if you give rise to wisdom realizing emptiness, that is fantastic, but it is not a mind that necessarily transforms all your virtues into causes for Buddhahood. Bodhicitta seems really easy to understand, doesn't it? Like conceptually, it's not that difficult to get a grip on what it is, but it's really difficult to give rise to it. In the monasteries, our teachers would say that first, emptiness is really hard to understand, right? It's explained as the lack of inherent existence of all phenomena, the mere imputation of all phenomena. And, you know, at first, it's hard to get a grip on if things really exist or not, and it's intellectually complex, but after a while, when you analyze emptiness through all sorts of reasonings, get lots of explanations, you do start to get a grip on it, right? You can intellectually understand it, and that's it, right? You've got the intellectual understanding of emptiness. There it is. Whereas bodhicitta, it seems really easy to get an intellectual grasp on it, right? The aspiration for full enlightenment for the sake of all mother sentient beings. But when you try to generate that in your continuum, when you try to meditate on that, it's really, really difficult. So why is that? Well, what's actually blocking it from arising in our continuum is self-grasping, as we explained before. Right? It's an incredibly profound and precious mind, and that's why it is so hard to give rise to, right? His Holiness talks from his own experience, right? He's spent a lifetime with bodhicitta in his own continuum. He has given rise to it, and talking from his experience, he says it's an extremely precious mind. And likewise, Shantideva talks of it as the supreme practice, and likewise Nagarjuna too talks of it in this way. And moreover, Shantideva says that bodhicitta is like the butter churned from the milk of the perfection of wisdom sutras. So all of them emphasize it as this extremely precious mind. So as for how you go about giving rise to bodhicitta, there are two main ways that are explained in the greater treatises. That is, giving rise to it by way of the sevenfold cause and effect instructions, and giving rise to it by way of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others. So ultimately, these two lineages of explanation meet back to the Buddha, of course. So with respect to the first lineage, which is the lineage of the instruction of the sevenfold cause and effect, The lineage starts with the Buddha, and then those sevenfold cause and effect instructions were passed to Maitreya, then to Asanga, then to Haribhadra, then to Serlingpa, or as he's sometimes called, Dharmakirti Sri of the Golden Isles, then passed on to Atisha, then to Drumdumpa, and then down to Tsongkhapa. So this is called the lineage of vast conduct, right? Vast in its means. And likewise, the lineage for the practice of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others came down in a similar manner, but at the start it's a little bit different. So it starts from the Buddha, then it came down through Manjushri, and then from Manjushri to Nagarjuna, from Nagarjuna to Shantideva, then in between many different lamas, and then again to Serlingpa or Dharmakirti Sri of the Golden Isles. He gave it to Atisha, and so on and so forth. It came down to us to the present day. So this lineage is called the lineage of great blessings. So Lama Selingpa held both of these lineages. He passed both of those lineages on to Atisha. So Atisha held both. And thus Atisha taught generating bodhicitta by way of both of these instructions. Both of those lineages came down to Tsongkhapa, who also, as you can see in his great treatise on the stages of the path, teaches generating bodhicitta by way of both of these practices. So one might wonder if Lama Selingpa and Lama Atisha held the same philosophical views. Actually, it's not the case. Atisha was a holder of the Madhyamaka Prasangika view, right? What we consider to be the highest view in the philosophical system. Whereas Selingpa held a lower view. He held a Chittamatram view. He held a Chittamatram view that essentially one can say views all phenomena as existing by way of their own characteristics. So not as refined as that is the Madhyamaka Prasangika view. When one studies and trains in generating bodhicitta, one needs to combine both of these lineages of instruction, of the sevenfold cause and effect instructions and the practice of equalizing and exchanging oneself for others. So the lineage as we've received it now emphasizes the combination of both of these. However, it is said that there are persons who do give rise to bodhicitta only through the sevenfold cause and effect instructions. And it is also said by some that those instructions are intended for slightly less intelligent persons, right, of less sharper faculties. Whereas some say that the practice of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others is intended for slightly more intelligent persons. Moreover, it is said that the second practice, that of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others, actually includes the practice of the sevenfold cause and effect instructions. However, the instructions of the sevenfold cause and effect instructions don't actually include the practice of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others. So these are some things that lineage masters say. So with respect to the beings who are able to give rise to bodhicitta, we spoke about that in the other class, right? That all 6 types of beings, including the hell beings and hungry ghosts, can give rise to bodhicitta. And just to follow up on that, some people will think, how is that possible? Because a hell birth is considered a birth where one doesn't have the opportunity to practice the Dharma. Generally, that's true. One would say that it's almost impossible for a hell being to have the opportunity to practice Dharma, let alone give rise to the thought of achieving full enlightenment for the sake of others. However, in very rare instances, it can happen. And that is stated in the sutra where the Buddha Shakyamuni himself gave rise to bodhicitta on the basis of a hell being. And I asked Geshe if I could quote the passages from sutra that he quoted in the class before that I didn't have at the time, but I've got them now. So Geshe said yes, so I will read them out to you. And Geshe, if I don't know if this exists in English, but Geshe has taken all of these from Binchen Sonandrakpa's general meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom sutras. So anyway, Binchen Sonandrakpa quotes a sutra, and it says, at that time, 100,000 gods and humans generated the aspiration towards full enlightenment. So this passage indicates that humans and gods can give rise to bodhicitta. He then quotes the sutra requested by the Naga king Sagara, which says 21,000 Nagas generated the aspiration towards unsurpassed enlightenment, which proves that animals can give rise to bodhicitta, right? Nagas are considered animals. And then with respect to hell beings being able to give rise to bodhicitta, Pinchen Sonandrakpa paraphrases the sutra of repaying the kindness. And he says, it says in the sutra of repaying the kindness that when our teacher was born as a fighter who pulled the chariots of hell, he generated the aspiration toward perfect enlightenment. If one can newly give rise to bodhicitta as a hell being or animal, then it must also be the case that one can do so too as a hungry ghost or demigod. So I've put all those quotations in the chat here. You can hopefully see them. Again. So bodhicitta can arise on the basis of any support within samsara. It doesn't matter if you're attractive or strong or physically look one way or the other. Bodhicitta doesn't judge or discriminate against what the body is, right? Unlike how we do in society, we judge people based on their appearances. Bodhicitta has nothing to do with that. It is said that when the Buddha was a trainee, right? When he was a bodhisattva before he achieved enlightenment, in one of his lifetimes, he was a ship captain and he would ferry people on his boat from one shore to the other. And at that time, a robber had boarded his ship and planned to kill 500 of the businessmen who Buddha Shakyamuni in his previous lifetime was ferrying. But this ship captain knew of his plan. He could see into his mind. And so he decided to murder him so that he would not be able to murder 500 of the businessmen on his ship. So he killed this robber out of compassion and therefore saved everyone on the ship. And he killed him out of compassion because he knew that if this robber was to murder all 500 of these people, then he would himself go to hell for thousands and thousands of years and be unimaginable torment. So if one can get a grasp of this murder actually took place out of compassion, right? The Buddha and Bodhisattvas give rise to bodhicitta generally after accumulating extensive collections of merit and purifying the obscurations. So giving rise to such a profound mind and being motivated through that and not being motivated through self-grasping, such a terrible negative deed does not incur such great negative effects, right? It doesn't become a negative misdeed in and of itself due to being motivated by a mind like bodhicitta. If one has bodhicitta, one's excellences and qualities increase. One accumulates the collections needed for Buddhahood, and one is more able to achieve the welfare of others. So to turn again to Shantideva's Bodhisattva's way of life, to his analogies for Bodhichitta. So this should be the second analogy. It's verse 11 in the first chapter. It is the analogy for being hard to find and of great value. So it reads, since the boundless wisdom of the only guide of beings perfectly examined and perceived its priceless worth, those who wish to leave this state of wandering should hold well to this precious bodhicitta. So Geshe went essentially word by word in the Tibetan, breaking down this verse. So starting with the first line, it says, since the boundless wisdom of the only guide of beings. So the only guide of beings refers to the Buddha himself. And he is a guide of beings because he is considered the one who takes them from the shore of samsara and delivers them to the far shore of enlightenment, right? So a guide or a ferryman, as in the previous story. So using his boundless wisdom, right? Limitless wisdom, he perfectly examined and perceived its priceless worth. So the worth of bodhicitta. He perceived that it is the best of all methods for becoming free of samsara. So therefore, those who wish to leave this state of wandering, right? This state of samsara should hold well to this precious bodhicitta, right? Having seen all of its aforementioned qualities. So we've gone through the 6 types of beings that are able to give rise to bodhicitta. Now we're going to talk about the mind basis that is required to give rise to bodhicitta. So essentially, we're just talking about the causes of bodhicitta. Generally speaking, the causes for giving rise to bodhicitta are boundless, but we can summarize it into maybe 3. And these you can find in, for example, Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path. So the first is faith that observes the conqueror, right? Faith observing the Buddha. And in Tsongkhapa's great treatise for the stages of the path, on page 48 in the second volume, there's an outline that says training the mind to be intent on enlightenment. And in this outline, Tsongkhapa links the generation of bodhicitta back to faith in the Buddha and really drives home the point that it must be conjoined with refuge, right? Because refuge in the 3 jewels encapsulates faith towards the Buddha. So having refuge, one is able to give rise to bodhicitta, and without it, it is extremely difficult. So that's the first general cause for giving rise to bodhicitta. The second is compassion, observing sentient beings. And the third is joyous effort that is able to tolerate the difficult deeds of bodhisattvas. So just to stay on the first cause for a second, if you don't have faith in the victor or the Buddha, it's very difficult to say one could give rise to bodhicitta, because the goal of bodhicitta is to attain Buddhahood. And therefore, one must understand what that is and have faith that those qualities of Buddhahood exist and that oneself is able to give rise to them. And this is what you are supposed to develop when you go for refuge, right? When you develop authentic refuge, you take refuge in the 3 jewels, and therefore in the Buddha jewel, by understanding what the Buddha is, right? By understanding his qualities of body, speech, and mind, right? Understanding the marks and signs as exemplified in Maitreya's ornament for clear realization. By understanding his qualities of speech, right? His 60 branches of speech, which essentially enable him to teach to sentient beings independence upon their inclinations and dispositions. And likewise, his qualities of mind, right? His stainless, pristine wisdom, which we can imagine as a type of clairvoyance, an omniscience that enables a Buddha to understand the minds of all sentient beings and again, know exactly what to teach them. So therefore, understanding that a Buddha has such qualities, oneself needs to aspire towards these qualities and have faith in them, thinking, I too can develop these qualities and I will develop these qualities for the sake of all sentient beings. So, faith observing the victor is the first cause. There's a passage that says, faith is the prerequisite. It is like the mother. Without it, it is difficult to give rise to even the smallest virtue, right? So one needs to seriously contemplate the importance of having faith. So the second cause, as we said, is compassion observing sentient beings. That's quite straightforward to understand. And the third is joyous effort that can tolerate or accept the difficulties required of the children of the victors. So once one has given rise to an attitude that forsakes oneself and cares about others, one starts to be able to think in terms of giving up one's body and one's possession and giving them to others. The most difficult among these two is, of course, giving one's own body for the sake of others. And of course, it is not something that a beginner can do. It is said that bodhisattvas on the path of accumulation and preparation cannot do that. It is only afterwards, once they reach more advanced stages, that they're able to give up their own body for the sake of others. But in the meantime, before we get to the higher levels, as beginners, we are able to train in giving away our belongings for the sake of others. So difficult deeds such as this and having joyous effort that can take on such things is considered the third cause. So the sevenfold cause and effect instructions by which one generates bodhicitta contain 6 causes and 1 result, that result being bodhicitta. If we include the practice of equanimity within this framework, then of course it becomes 8, 7 causes and 1 result. But generally, of course, as I said, there are limitless and boundless causes for generating bodhicitta. So in one sutra and in also Asanga's bodhisattva's levels, he says there are generally 4 causes, 4 conditions, and 4 forces for giving rise to bodhicitta. So if we look at those quickly, the 4 causes are the cause of awakening into the Mahayana lineage, the cause of being guided by a teacher, the cause of being conjoined with great compassion, and the cause of accepting the hardships of others. So what does it mean to awaken into the Mahayana lineage, right? This first cause. Well, generally, when one gives rise to compassion, and I'm going to double check with Geshe because I didn't hear him say great compassion. I only heard compassion. I'm going to just check with him now if he meant great compassion. But essentially, that is when you awaken into the Mahayana lineage. Let me just confirm this. Gelagi tekchin durik sebekapso ani di ningji gebikigires jisoi ba di ningji chembolo kogrbes.
Ning Shimbo, Ning Shimbo, Ning Shimbo.
Plus. Mhm. Right, so Geshe clarified this to mean great compassion. So as soon as you give rise to great compassion, you have awakened your Mahayana lineage. So you're not yet a bodhisattva when you awaken into the Mahayana lineage, right? It is a prerequisite to becoming a bodhisattva. And then the second cause, which is being guided by a teacher, essentially illustrates to us that without a spiritual guide on the path, you cannot develop bodhicitta because you lack the instructions, right? How can you give rise to bodhicitta without somebody who gives you the instructions for doing so? And so on and so forth. There are other causes. If you develop bodhicitta, then through accomplishing the welfare of others, you automatically accomplish your own welfare. This is the sort of powerful and potent mind that we're talking about, that through working for the aims of others, you automatically achieve your own. For example, while the Buddha was alive, there were many great kings also present at that time. And it was to the Buddha that this amazing assembly made all these offerings, right? An amazing assembly, including arhats and so forth, made all these offerings. And this is because one having bodhicitta in one's continuum, through the power of that, all these external conditions naturally manifest. So, of course, Buddhahood you achieve for the sake of all others. But of course, by achieving Buddhahood, you are then a Buddha and you have accomplished your own aims. So there are great benefits and excellences to be had through pursuing bodhicitta. While the Buddha was alive, he never asked for offerings. He never said, give this to me. But beings who came into his presence were overcome with faith and made such offerings to him. And likewise, 2,500 years later, in the present day, people still visit temples where there are images of the Buddha. They still make pilgrimage to Bodh Gaya and make all sorts of offerings, including flowers, lamps, and so forth. Why is this? This is because the Buddha
哦，这点
was
放上。
motivated by altruism. He achieved his Buddhahood for the sake of others, and therefore his disciples can share in his merit when they make offerings to such a sublime being. So it is because of these aspirations and dedications made during the time the Buddha was a trainee that even right through to the present day, in the West, where people don't have faith in the Buddha generally, they still recognize him as a great being. We must meditate on bodhicitta. We must bring it into our practice. And we must recognize that we have the capacity to do so. We can meditate on bodhicitta. So, in accordance with this profoundly precious mind, we can start with cultivating attitudes of kindness. Because as much as we are kind to others, that's how much benefit we can bring into the world. And it only leads to profit, right? Not loss, right? If you're kind to somebody else, how do they react? They trust you, they like you, right? You build a better relationship with people. But if you lie to people, you cheat people, you're mean to people, they don't trust you, they don't like you, and relationships start to fall apart. So even in the general level of our worldly society, we can see how important it is to cultivate kindness. That's good. Geshe says something quite profound, so I wanted to make sure I got it right. So, quoting Lama Chupa, right, the Guru Puja, it says, "You are the Guru, you are the Yidam, you are the Khandro and the Dharma
Puja.
protector, also the Dharma protector." If we think, what is a guru? It's the person who grants us the blessings to be able to transform our mind and the one who protects us from cyclic existence, right? But if you think, what is it that grants blessings? That's bodhicitta. It is bodhicitta that causes us to tame our untamed mind and to pacify our disturbed mind and protect us from cyclic existence. So if you really think, what is granting you blessings? It is bodhicitta. So therefore, the bodhicitta is like the real Lama. And the Guru Puja continues, you are the Lama, you are the Yidam. What is a Yidam? The Yidam is how we think of it is the meditation deity through the accomplishment of which we achieve the supreme siddhi and the worldly siddhis. So the supreme siddhi being the state of the victor, right, Buddhahood, and the worldly siddhis being um, riches, wealth, whatever you need to accomplish your temporary aims in this life. But again, if you think, who is it or what is it that really bestows these accomplishments? It's bodhicitta. So again, you can think that bodhicitta is the real yidam, right? Because through having bodhicitta, you achieve both of those siddhis, the supreme siddhi of enlightenment and likewise the worldly siddhis, right? You are granted whatever you need to achieve your temporary aims. So you are the Lama, you are the Yidam, you are the Khandro, so the Khandro being the Dakinis. So a Dakini can be male or female, and they can be at many different levels of realization. But we can say that essentially they are the agents that assist disciples on their path towards Buddhahood. Again, that's essentially what bodhicitta is. It is the agent that assists the disciples to achieve Buddhahood, right? Through being endowed with bodhicitta, you accumulate the collections and so on and so forth. So again, bodhicitta is like the Dakinis. And likewise, you are the Dharma protector. So the protectors within Buddhism are those beings who are oath-bound to help disciples overcome inner and outer obstacles. Again, if you have bodhicitta, it helps to avert those harmful spirits and illnesses, right? They can no longer affect you. And there are many hundreds of different types of harmful spirits and illnesses listed within the canon, and it can help avert all of those. Shantideva goes as far as saying in his Bodhisattva's Way of Life that if you have bodhicitta, it overcomes the Lord of Death. It's said that if you possess bodhicitta, then non-human spirits like ghosts can no longer harm you. And there's a famous story that is told of a Geshe who spent a long time meditating on bodhicitta and he gave rise to it. And then he went to return to Tibet. So this area in Tibet that he had to pass through had become renowned for being overcome by harmful spirits that were actually killing people. And not only people, the spirits were harming the animals in that area as well. So the Tibetans avoided that place and they told people to not pass through there or go anywhere close. But this Geshe, in order to get to his village, had to pass through this area and he didn't want to go around it. So the people pleaded with him and said, don't go through there. They're very harmful spirits and they will attack you. And the Geshe was, he didn't care because he understood that he had bodhicitta and harmful spirits wouldn't be able to affect him. So he went through that place, and as expected, the harmful spirits approached him and manifested in front of him and wished to harm him, but this Geshe was overcome with compassion towards the spirits due to his bodhicitta. And due to that, they couldn't harm him. So eventually, through the force of his great compassion, he overcame the spirits entirely and banished them from that area. So that's just one story, and there are also other stories that indicate that not only can you overcome spirits, but you can overcome the external elements. So it is said that bodhisattvas who give rise to bodhicitta are of two types, of dull faculties and of sharp faculties. Generally speaking, all bodhisattvas are sharp facultied, but within being intelligent, sharp facultied beings, there are different levels, right? Slightly dull and those who are more sharp, right? So the slightly less sharp, intelligent bodhisattvas first give rise to bodhicitta and then give rise to the wisdom realizing emptiness. Whereas those sharpest among the sharp facultied bodhisattvas actually first give rise to the wisdom realizing emptiness before they generate bodhicitta. Right? So that's how it's explained in the greater treatises. But for us as practitioners on this basis in this lifetime, we're going to give rise to it either by way of emphasizing the sevenfold cause and effect instruction or the practice of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others. And whichever way we're approaching it, day by day, we're slowly going to get towards bodhicitta. Day by day, we're slowly going to purify our appearances, as it is said. One shouldn't expect immediate results, right? It's not fair to expect that we have strong immediate change, but eventual change is guaranteed. And this is because our mind is said to be in the nature of clear light. Because our mind is by nature empty and by nature clear light, then change is possible, as it is explained in many of the higher treatises. Due to this nature of the mind, whatever you practice, slowly, slowly, results are bound to be produced. Whether it was in the Perfection of Wisdom sutras or whatever sutra the Buddha spoke, he only taught the welfare of others and prioritizing others. He never said that this person is bad, he should be killed, he should be beaten, right? He always emphasized looking inwards and destroying our own self-cherishing, destroying our own ignorance, anger, and attachment, right? He never emphasized that people were bad. He only emphasized that afflictions were bad. And during the time of the Buddha, there was a person who relied on a non-Buddhist teacher who instructed him to kill 1,000 people. And if he did accomplish that, he would achieve liberation. So this person got up to 999, and he just needed one more to achieve his goal. And the Buddha encountered this person, right, who had killed 999 people and would even have killed the Buddha to complete his goal. But the Buddha never said he is a bad person, right? He only looked inwards at the afflictions and said the afflictions are bad. But in our societies, in our world, we emphasize the opposite. We point to people and say people are bad. But we shouldn't be doing this. It's important for us to learn to differentiate between people and the afflictions in their mind and separate the two. In the next class, we're going to meditate on the sevenfold cause and effect instructions. So when we train our minds in this, we're going to follow the outlines in Tsongkhapa's great treatise for the stages of the path, and he starts with equanimity. So prior to starting the practice of the sevenfold cause and effect instructions, we first must equalize our mind with respect to all sentient beings. So we'll start with that, and then we'll move on to knowing all sentient beings to be our mothers. And Geshe joked that there's some debate about this, and the people in the monasteries, they debate and laugh and say, is this person your mother or your father? But that's not what it means. It means that recognizing all sentient beings have been one's mother, either now or in the past. After that, it's recollecting the kindness of these beings who have been one's mother, wishing to repay their kindness, then cultivating affectionate love, then giving rise to compassion, then giving rise to the wholehearted resolve, and then to bodhicitta. So we're attempting to cover the greater scope in 6 sessions, 6 classes, which is really difficult and means that we're going to go over the topics in a really rough manner and not in a very broad and extensive, detailed way. So there are hundreds of pages on this scope within the Great Treatise, which you can look at, but just understand that we're going over it very, very roughly. Does anybody have a question?
If you have a question, you can unmute yourself. If you have anybody, if you have any, even your practical questions, like your practical meditation, can feel free to ask as well.